Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Cassidy Diamond. I am the Associate Director of Public Programs and Events here at the IDA. Thank you for joining us for this conversation around the documentary Not Going Quietly, moderated by the LA Times' Robert Abele. Before we get started, I would like to start, as always, with a brief land acknowledgement. And then I'm coming to you today from Chicago, which is on the unceded land of the Potawatomi people, who have been stewards of this land for generations. I would like to give a shout out, as always, to IndiaWire for their support of our screening series. And we're coming up to our last month of films. You can check out all of our upcoming screenings at documentary.org/screening-series. And without any further ado, I'm going to hand things over to Robert for this great conversation. Welcome, Robert.
Hi, thanks for being here. We have with us the director of Not Going Quietly, Nicholas Bruckman. We have producer Amanda Roddy. We have executive producer Bradley Whitford. And we have the man of the hour himself, Ady Barkan, the subject of this wonderful documentary. And I guess I'll just start by asking a basic question, but there's a good story behind it. How does a project like this start?
Sure. Thanks, Robert. And thank you to the IDA for hosting this. The project began when Ady and his team brought myself and my team on to make a short launch video for the Be a Hero Fund. Ady had just encountered Senator Jeff Flake on the plane, and him and his co-conspirator, Liz Jaff, launched a dastardly long shot underdog campaign to flip the House in the midterm elections, all based on this one viral video of Ady begging then Senator Jeff Flake to be a hero. And at the time, I thought this was going to be a short fundraising video for basically a political nonprofit. But when I flew out to meet Ady in Santa Barbara, it turned out to be so much more. In one of the first frames of the film, you see Ady topless saying, "All right, let's get this thing on the road. Let's get started with this interview." And really, in that moment, there was the spark of, this is a movie. This is not a promotional video. And so we began the conversation then and there about what would be a real, honest, authentic, observational documentary about his life. And there really wasn't any time to waste on that, because when I met Ady, he actually only had 6 months or so left to speak with his natural voice. We didn't know what would happen with his voice. And there was just this incredible urgency to capture every moment, not only for the world, but for his family to preserve this time. And that was really the genesis of the project.
Amanda, Bradley, did you want to mention how you got involved?
You go, Amanda.
Okay, I'll start first and then I'll hand it off to Bradley. So I worked at Nick's production company, People's Television, and was there when Liz Jaff initially gave us the call asking if we wanted to make this initial video to promote the Be a Hero campaign. And when we did that first shoot in that first video, we met Ady a couple months later, and I remember he was speaking and telling his story, and I kind of looked around and I saw our gaffer tearing up, and I saw our sound guy tearing up, and I was really moved, and I was like, oh, this is affecting me and all of us. I know it's going to affect so many more people. And that was kind of one of the moments where I was like, oh, I know this is a much bigger deal and a much bigger story. And so when Nick and I were talking about maybe this could be a bigger film, I think we were immediately on the same page. And I was all in from the very start. And I also was a big Ady Barkan fan earlier on because he's on Pod Save America, and I already told him that. But yeah, great speaker. So that's how I initially became involved.
I don't know if it was on Pod Save America. I think I was aware of Ady's activism about concerning reforming the Fed. I knew of him in sort of activist circles, and it was love at first sight in a Starbucks. We were going to Senator Feinstein's office, was when I met him, to put pressure on for the Dreamers. And he was just the definition of a happy warrior. There were some counter protesters, Nazi-esque, anti-immigration people, and Ady, who could still speak at that time and was moving with difficulty, said, put me in the wheelchair, put me in front, and let him punch the guy with ALS. It'll be great publicity. And I heard, I think it was from Ady, that there was documentation, and I knew immediately that Ady embodies the, erases the distance between what is political and what is personal. I think that's what Nicholas has said that before, and it's why his story is so powerful. And I got them to the Duplass brothers, who are great producers and sort of fundamental, like sort of middle school football coaches about storytelling, like what's your beginning, what's your middle, where are you going? And they combine that with a lot of freedom. I just wanted to get Ady's story out there. Ady makes the point often that everybody has this capacity to affect the political system. We underestimate our capacity to affect the political system, as frustrating, as obscenely transactional as it can be. And Ady, I envy Ady's strategic mind. I just want to tear Manchin and cinema apart. And Ady will go out there and say, wouldn't it be great, Joe Manchin, to have the Manchin child care centers? He's always able to be very strategic, and I think it made a huge difference. I really do believe that healthcare became the issue partially through Ady's work that flipped the house. So it's not a sentimental story about someone, tilting at windmills out there. It's somebody who is using everything they have to make a real difference.
So Ady, I'm kind of curious, when you realized that you're going to be the subject of a documentary, did you have any ground rules for the crew, and did those change as they went along?
Thanks so much for your interest in this film and for hosting this conversation today. In terms of ground rules, not really. We let Nick and Amanda have full access to our lives, toddler tantrums, and all. As we went along, it was hard sometimes to have a camera capture my more difficult moments, or Rachel, and I needed some time and space to simply be without having so many people around. But generally we knew that agreeing to do a documentary like ours meant capturing the reality of our lives, so we let them.
Nick, what kind of conversations did you have early on, maybe with Amanda, about what this movie was going to be, what it would look like, maybe what you didn't want to do?
Yeah, there were things that we knew and things we didn't. I mean, we knew what the trajectory of Ady's illness would be, but we didn't know the trajectory of the 2018 or the 2020 elections, or how instrumental Ady would be. We never could have imagined at the beginning that we'd be sitting in a room with Kamala Harris and later Joe Biden virtually, and Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, all kind of begging for Ady's support because he would be the most influential or most powerful activist, as Political called him, in America. But we knew right away we didn't want to do something saccharine. We didn't want to make a medical documentary. Ady always had this inherent kind of Ady's humor, which is this kind of resistance that he uses, refusing to let the disease define him in the same way he refused to let Donald Trump define America. It's this beautiful metaphor, and we knew that had to drive the movie. And so that was always the thing that we followed, was kind of Ady's spirit, this rebelliousness. The whole movie is Ady kind of saying F you to this disease and to that administration. And that was what we knew, but the rest of it was really just rolling the cameras and being there at that moment and really working with Ady and his family. And Ady was very open to us being in it right away. He said on a recent panel that, deep down in his heart, he knew that this documentary would make him rich and famous. And that was the rationale. But with Rachel, with his children, with the other people around him, we did have to tread carefully. And what I think is so important about it is that Ady really inherently understood, and Rachel did too, the power of storytelling. That's what Ady did to Jeff Lake on the road. That's what the Be a Hero movement was about, is telling these short personal stories to power, taking disabled people, sick people, activists, finding politicians in their homes, offices, airplanes, wherever, and using your stories armed with social media cameras as a weapon. And that, to me, as a long form documentary filmmaker, was incredibly attractive, right? Stories can shape the world. And so the film, that's kind of was our guiding light in what we knew it would be. But I don't think any of the details of what you just saw in Not Going Quietly, we could have anticipated.
Yeah, I like that the movie, anytime a documentary has something else going on that you aren't anticipating, is great. And for me, it's like there are many words you can use to describe this movie, but I love that it really wants to upend the way you think of the terms inspiring and exploiting. And you talked a bit about that. I just think those two words get a workout in not the ways you're expecting.
Yeah, if I could, it is a great moment in the movie, and it's especially funny if you know Liz Jaff at all, when she does not hesitate a nanosecond to say that she is using Ady's disease to make a political point. That's one of my favorite things. This thing works on so many levels. It works on a personal level. It works on a political level. It tells a story about how connected we need to be to make progress, how we can make progress. One of the things now when young people get cynical, I find myself saying, you're right to be disappointed, but look what other people have been up against. Look at what the civil rights leaders have been up against, what Nelson Mandela was up against. Action is the antidote to despair. And then on a personal level, I think for everybody, it's this fundamental lesson politically and personally that obstacles don't have to define us. They can reveal us. And I feel like ALS doesn't define Ady to me at all. It revealed him in not that I didn't wish it didn't happen, but we all have that opportunity to be revealed rather than defined is a powerful thing, I think.
Ady, I mean, as the movie went along, I mean, it's been known in the doc world, certainly, that sometimes the director and the subject can start to feel like collaborators. I mean, not so much that, they're like, with something separated by a camera. So did you ever get that sense during shooting that you and the filmmakers were becoming collaborators?
Definitely. We invested so much of our time into it. And we talked a lot about what was interesting or valuable to film. We grew close to both Nick and Amanda. Carl especially warmed to both of them. But it was also always clear that they would ultimately have the final call in shaping the movie.
Nick, Amanda, do you want to talk about the collaborative quality?
Yeah, I think one of the great things about working with Ady and Rachel, and more specifically Ady for this, we also felt like Ady and Liz were great at kind of directing us around and saying like, yeah, this is a good thing to film, or come get this. Or Ady would tell, our cinematographer writer, come with me to the shower. We're going to reveal something new to you. And so that was great because, some tricky, hairy moments where Ady, to his credit, was really vulnerable and wanted to kind of show warts and all, his experience of having and going through ALS, as well as his political work and his commitment to his work and continuing to persist despite all the challenges that faced him. And that's the kind of stuff that really deeply moves people, and I think is why the film is a really good film. It's because of his vulnerability, and the same applies to Rachel too. She definitely was more behind the scenes in terms of the filming process, but she opened up so much of her life to us, more than we could have asked for. And I think, as Ady alluded to earlier, that's a really difficult thing to have a film crew follow you around, especially at that point in the process of the disease, because Ady was losing his voice really rapidly, and it was really hard to do interviews with Ady knowing that, like, you know, he had a lot of work that he loved doing. He had conversations to have with Rachel and Carl, and we wanted to be careful about how much of his time and energy we were taking up, but he was really, really generous, and so was Rachel. And we're indebted to them, because the film is a much better one because of that vulnerability. And so they were really great collaborators for us too, because of how much they were willing to share. And we just tried to be as respectful as possible during that, knowing that the documentary filmmaking process is a pretty invasive one, and especially the type of film we chose to make, which is a verite film. So we mostly did it scene by scene, and that takes a lot more filming. So they were really, really, really good to us, and yeah, great collaborators. Would do it again, but no.
And it's a road movie. A road movie on top of that.
A road movie. I just want to say quickly, I want Nicholas to answer that, but you cannot overstate how incredible Rachel is through this whole experience. Anyone, I know Nick now has a young child, having a young child, seeing someone you love deeply go through what Ady is going through. Her strength is just astonishing to me.
Yeah, and to add about Rachel and tie it back to the collaboration, I think in many ways Rachel comes across in the movie as a dutiful wife and mother and supporter of Ady, but she also believed in the mission of the Be a Hero movement. She wasn't a bystander to that. And I think that's something that brought us all together as I came to this as a filmmaker, and I came to this as a journalist, but I don't believe in pure objectivity from the documentary filmmaker's standpoint. I mean, I'm a strong believer in Medicare for all. And I think when Ady let us into that shower, when he took us to his doctor's appointments, when he, let us film these painful moments in his life, he knew that this movie, much like his own story, could be a weapon in that fight. And I think where there was tension was really in that balance of the political and personal. I think there were times where, we did show Ady a rough cut and went through notes. And from my perspective, activism is what pulled me into this movie. But I think Ady could have been on a road trip to save America from Trump, or he could have been writing the greatest symphony of all time. The idea for me was how Ady chooses to make meaning out of this otherwise incredibly meaningless, tragic situation. And I found that very powerful. And I wanted to make sure that when audiences saw this film, it wasn't just how can I get involved in the movement for healthcare justice. I wanted them to ask the question, what would I do if I were dealt these cards in my life? And how would I turn that into something positive? And of course, activism is what Ady and I connected on. But if I was a musician, or if I was, in another field, I think that message can translate across many, many different fields of pursuit in life. And that to me is the way that Ady really changed me personally, especially as Bradley pointed out, being a dad now. My kid's about the same age as Ady was when he was diagnosed. And it makes me think a lot about how I would maintain that relationship in that powerful way that Ady has done with his crazy kid, Carl.
Ady, there's how we see ourselves and how others see us. And I'm wondering what most surprised you about what your life looked like when you watched this documentary.
That's a really interesting question. I think that both Carl and I got an especially generous edit, but overall I think that the filmmakers did an accurate and powerful job of capturing my life. Who you see on screen is who I am, and how I see myself.
And I'm wondering for the filmmakers, I mean, like there's what you there's what you know going into making a movie, and then what you learn making it that you didn't think you were going to learn. So can you talk about kind of your education, whether it's in this illness, whether it's in activism, what you learned that you didn't think you knew?
Yeah, that's a great question. We learned so much over the course of making this film. I think one thing that was really a once in a lifetime kind of experience for all of us was the making of a political movement, and watching Ady and Liz work together and build Be a Hero basically on the road, that and seeing like how small of a close-knit team it was at the very start and how they kind of built momentum over the months and then years was really amazing to watch. And Liz was so committed and dedicated, and she really was kind of like a bulldog in terms of getting press and making sure that there were events lined up. And Helen Brosnan as well, who you see on the film, was incredible at coordinating those events, and it took a whole village working together. And when we first started the tour, most of them kind of had just met each other too, or had recently met each other. So we were all kind of navigating a lot of different personalities and trying to figure out how we all fit together. So it was really kind of a beautiful and unique experience to get to see them all develop relationships together and kind of become the Be a Hero team. And then it has since evolved over time. So that was one thing that I don't think I anticipated learning so much about as I did when I went on that tour. And then I got to see, we all got to see Ady then, testify in front of Congress on behalf of Medicare for All, which was incredibly moving and, again, a once in a lifetime experience. And then he went on to interview all the Democratic presidential candidates, which still truly blows my mind. They all were willing to come out to his home in Santa Barbara to talk to him right before the election. And that kind of a thing doesn't just happen. They were all really committed. And I think it's corny, but also being around all of these people made me so hopeful and reminded me that real heroes do exist and are fighting for the things and causes and issues that we feel are important. And that was that definitely made me feel a lot more hopeful about the future and what I can do. And it also helps me to realize how to what's valuable in life and how to prioritize my own time. And I think a lot of us felt that way. And I hope that's something that people also learn through the film as well.
Nick, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I totally echo everything Amanda said. I mean, one of the titles we were playing around with on this movie is "What's Your Excuse?" Because if Ady can do it, it really, you can't be jaded being in Ady's company, and that's what we really wanted to translate to people seeing this. You can't be hopeless. And people talk about the access into Ady's world. How did you get into those personal scenes with him and his wife? But actually, it was getting behind the scenes with the activists and the strategists that was really hard. Liz was not down to be filmed in many of those scenes, much more resistant even than Rachel or the other folks that you might think, because you don't often see those strategists in their element building these kinds of tools. You don't see those kinds of trainings where, those activists like Ady who confront politicians, that's not a random occurrence. They actually practice that for days or hours or months, or in Ady's case, years, learning how to talk to politicians. That's actually a tactic and a strategy. And that's something we wanted to lift the hood up on, not just because it's cool or it's interesting, but by demystifying it, it makes it feel possible. It makes it feel like, that's how you get the right hashtag, you get the right clip, you find out where they are, you shame them in the right way with your story, with the vulnerabilities that they have. And that makes people care. And then you get listened to, and then you win an election, and then you hold that elected official that you got elected accountable to their promises by shaming them online. Like, that's how it's done. And you can do it without even, moving your hands if you're Ady. So I think revealing that was a learning lesson for me. And, I didn't know anything about ALS going into this movie. I mean, I was like Ice Bucket Challenge and that kind of thing that I think most people had heard about. And so for me, it was a very real and raw experience becoming close to Ady, experiencing that personally, learning about that journey and learning about the technology that Ady has, which has both kept him alive and in many ways kind of increased his power, his communication system, his eye gaze system that allowed him to testify, that he's having this conversation with today. And so that's something also that I think is, a subtext to the politics of the film, but the way technology both empowers activists, the way technology empowers patients like Ady, and of course the need for that technology to be distributed through an equitable healthcare system that Ady's fighting for.
Bradley, do you want to talk about what you kind of learned or were educated in making this movie?
Well, one thing I want to say is I could tell the magic sauce in any storytelling is an honest and urgent need to tell the story well. And that was something when I was talking with Nicholas and Amanda, I could feel, I relayed to the Duplass brothers my belief in their belief in this mission. There's a lot of storytelling, not as much in the documentary world, but in the Hollywood world, which is basically people telling jokes that they personally don't think are funny. that they don't believe it. So I'm always sniffing, and I could feel their commitment both personally and politically to get this story right. You know, I have not been involved in a documentary before. I participate in stories that you shoot, knowing how they will come together. The documentary world is, you have all of this material and you have to find the story. I guess what I would say, what I learned in just as a novice in the documentary arena is that the basic need to tell a story well, you know, it reminds me of something often. This is probably not the right thing to say on a documentary panel, but often fiction storytelling can get us to the truth often more than just bare bones nonfiction. I remember a teacher of mine at Juilliard saying the truth isn't an old man staring into a fireplace. The truth is what the man is thinking about his grandchildren and the loss, and that storytelling is even more difficult in the documentary arena because you do have to make choices. And you do have to find the arc of it, and you're constantly saying, what do I want to say? Where do I want this to end up? It was a fascinating experience.
Well, yeah, and then in the case of verite, you know, filmmaking, it has its own thrills and challenges in terms of like the story you have in your head and then what you're filming. Nick, do you want to talk about those obstacles that ended up being like maybe happy accidents or something, the things that you came across that helped make the movie?
Well, the thing that Bradley's saying reminds me that one thing we learned, and I am kind of taking away from this project, is Ady kept making the news. He kept doing bigger and crazier stunts, you know, from Susan Collins to Kavanaugh to many things which didn't make the movie. And I thought, as a kind of political documentary filmmaker, like, oh, my subject's making headlines and he's in the New York Times. We need to tell that story because that's what other people in the media care about. And yet in reality, what mattered was actually the dynamic between Ady and his collaborators. It was about the parallels between his relationship with his body, his relationship with his son, and ultimately his relationship with our democracy and his place in it as an activist. And so one of the takeaways is don't try to make a film into an article, especially when your subject is growing in prominence. And we did chase some of those rabbits down and then realized in the edit, like, oh, you know what, that thing Ady did where he raised the most money ever in history against an incumbent candidate, you know, which was totally fascinating, doesn't fit squarely into this narrative. What we want to do is actually be home with him, with his family. And it speaks to that kind of higher truth that Bradley is talking about that we wanted to achieve with the film. And it was delicate. I mean, we had 300 hours of footage to try to make every other personal and political scene work. And sometimes just too utterly hilarious things would happen back to back narratively. And you had to pick, because I think what we wanted to do on this film was bring people on that incredibly poignant journey that you have with Ady, where 1 minute you're just busting a gut laughing because he's saying the most, ridiculous, self-deprecating, dirty joke of all time. And then in the next moment, he's got like 1,000 rapt people in attention ready to join him in the revolution. And that kind of like tension between those two experiences that I have spending time with him was what we wanted to give people. And that made the editing on this take over a year to get that exactly right. And, we had rough cuts of this film. I don't know if Ady knows this, where people saw the rough cut and they said, wow, this is a great movie. I mean, he's a great activist, but he's kind of an asshole, Ady. I mean, he left his wife on the road for all that time. And we realized, because in the edit, we hadn't really balanced the tension that Ady was feeling about those issues. And so it's amazing how one little dial you can turn in a documentary can change people's whole perspectives. And so we spent a lot of time really getting that right.
Ady, your sense of humor, obviously, it's been mentioned a lot. It's one of the great takeaways of the movie, and it's such a part of who you are. And I'm wondering, what for you was the funniest part of having a movie made about you?
This is an example of Ady's incredible timing, by the way. No, I think there's a technical.
Yeah. Well, I can ask like Amanda, what is your favorite funny moment of Ady's from this movie?
Oh man, that's such a hard question. It's a great question, but it's a really hard question. Both Ady and Nate, I think Nate is also hilarious. Yes. Ady and Nate's dynamic always cracked me up throughout the filming process. There was one day, this isn't in the film, but one day we went to Yale Law School with Ady, and he was chatting with a professor there, and she was asking him a bunch of questions that she had been wanting to ask him for a long time, and they were chatting, and at a certain point she was like, I don't want to, I know you got to make a speech later, I don't want to exhaust you, like I can just shut up. And then Nate stepped in and said, oh no, he loves this, trust me, the ALS gets progressively worse around people he doesn't like. And that was a really good example of a lot of the dialogue that went along trip. So being around the two of them was awesome.
I'm grateful to the filmmakers for capturing an honest portrait of who I am. I think people who have only seen me online read me as an earnest person fighting for justice. So perhaps not funny, but it is refreshing to see people experience my cheeky humor and add on to their understanding of who I am as a person, as a friend, as a dad. Like the shower scene with Nate, it's always funny to see people kind of look around in shock because those who don't know me haven't experienced that particular texture of my personality. And with all that we are made to carry in this life, sometimes, you just have to laugh or say something outrageous and silly to cut through the thick gloom and bring us into the present moment.
Ady, can I ask if you could have a part 2 of this documentary that covered this past year in activism through your eyes? What would you want it to say or show?
Hey, I like that idea. A sequel. But if we were making another documentary about this past year in activism through my eyes, I think it would be about the wave of people who defeated our former fascist president and then just didn't stop. Because while it's hard and exhausting to keep going, the work of building a more just society must continue after the election is won. And I think a lot of people learned that lesson from the Obama era and have really kicked it into high gear this past year, especially around legislation to address our climate, caregiving, and health crises. I don't know if we would be on the verge of delivering on these priorities in Congress right now if it wasn't for the advocacy of progressive activists and lawmakers this past year. I'd watch a movie about that.
Yeah, what Nick, Amanda, Bradley, you could make an entirely different movie about activism probably just over the last like year and a half. So what do you, so in this movie coming out now and the time that it shows, you know, what do you think it has to say now for people?
Yeah, I'm really excited that the movie is coming out now. The story ends in the lead up to Trump's defeat in 2020, but it's really more relevant now than ever because it's about holding the politicians that we elect accountable. And that's exactly what Ady's doing today. I think it's the most relevant moment. I'm also excited because I think in large part due to Ady, as Bradley has said, we have the biggest support for Medicare for all that has ever existed in my lifetime. And I think that's partly because of Ady's work. It really feels hopeful. Everybody in my generation or younger supports it, not everybody, but a great majority, stats that we never had before. And I think it's possible in our lifetimes because of Ady. And I am really grateful for the way the movie's been received so far, not just the movie, but Ady through it. He was nominated in the Critics' Choice for the best living subject of a documentary. And I'm very glad he's still with us to get that title because I really believe he's one of the great civil rights icons of our time and will be remembered that way for a long time to come. And if the movie can be a small part of that, I think it's timeless. And I think the message is not about one administration or one policy, but it's about speaking truth to power. And that's what we're all doing together. And just grateful that Ady let us do it.
Yeah, and I similar to that, I just hope that people watch this film and realize how fun and joyful being engaged in our democracy can be and activism. And there were so many examples of people who took their own personal stories and confronted power with them and actually made a difference and made a change, where you see Anna Maria kind of had that breakthrough moment. And I hope people see that it takes all of us doing something in order to kind of have that breakthrough moment for the whole. And I think that's really hopeful. And I think our greatest wish is that people see through their example that this can be a fun, engaging, and really meaningful thing. And there's no act that's too small as well. You can go and show up to a protest and just be there. You can share your story. You can help with voter registration. Anything really, really goes a long way. And so I hope people see this and view activism as being more accessible to them, and get excited about it too and bring their friends along too.
Yeah, I hope that, Ady is the embodiment of, the idea that you don't get a democracy, you have to make it every damn day. And elections, no matter who is elected, they're not periods, they are commas. And to go to what something Nick said, I don't think anybody, Ady, in the midst of the horror of what he is going through, his activist mind saw this unique opportunity to lay bare the complete, fucking insanity that every American does not have access to healthcare. It is completely insane. And I don't think any human being has normalized that obvious truth than Ady has. And that's a very powerful legacy. It doesn't mean, that we're going to get Medicare for all next week, but I do believe that Ady's work is a huge step forward to the time when everybody has access to healthcare, which is should be a fundamental right.
And Ady, where has your activism been focused of late, now that, as you say in the film, the weaker you get, the louder you become?
These days I've been sharing my story about how home care keeps me alive. Unlike most others living with ALS, I have access to 24-hour home care, and so I get to live a beautiful and full life with my family at home, and continue the work of securing healthcare justice in America. I can only afford home care because I successfully forced my health insurance company to pay for most of the costs. Otherwise, I would be forced into a nursing home, separated from my family in order to stay alive. To be honest, I don't know if that would be a quality of life that I would be willing to tolerate. Nursing homes are dangerous institutions where seniors and disabled people are merely warehoused. Since the pandemic began, 138,000 disabled children and adults in nursing homes have died from the coronavirus. That's why I, and other advocates, are pushing Congress to fully fund home and community-based services. Providing care for people we love isn't a Republican issue or a Democratic issue, it's an American issue, and a moral one to ensure that everyone gets to live safely, with dignity and respect.
Yeah, the care industry is only becoming more and more important. For the rest of you, do you want to talk about how this movie, what it has to offer that discussion?
I'll just say quickly, one thing that I always want to, Ady wrote recently, and I think it's true. Somebody asked me, sort of like, how is he? How is Ady? And it was before I said, he's happy. He is in love with his children. He is in love with his wife. He is making a difference. And it is only possible. I know I had, in my family, I was very close to my mother. I have 4 siblings. She had a stroke, which she just needed 24-hour care. 24-hour care is at least $120,000 a year. So all of my brothers and sisters work. No one has that kind of money. Because I have a financial horseshoe hanging out of my butt because I made a career out of a high school extracurricular activity. I could give my mother the most wonderful end of her life, engaged with our family, with us. Everybody needs to have access to that, regardless of how lucky they are financially. And I think that's again, that's an issue Ady has made a real difference on. And, you know, don't ask me, ask Nancy Pelosi. I mean, he has brought it to the forefront, and the people who do home care are by and large women of color. They're horrifically underpaid. It's all part of the legacy that was, you know, overlooked in the New Deal because of racist Democrats in the South. And it needs to be fixed, and we're beginning to address it. I keep telling people before I ever met Ady, like, nobody knows what's coming. Like your parents are going to get sick. You know, we are all going to have to face catastrophic illness, everybody in this country, and it's something people need support for.
Yeah,
I only have oh, go ahead, Nick.
I was just going to add to what Bradley said quickly, and it relates to Ady, which is I get the same thing where people say, wow, it was so great that you were there to capture that moment in Ady's life where he was walking and talking and fighting for democracy and confronting those people. And I tell them that Ady's best work is ahead of him. And I think that this movie is going to support that next phase of what Be a Hero is doing. And so if there's a takeaway, there's a call to action, it's become part of your democracy, but also join Ady and join the Be a Hero movement, who's doing it every day. It's really just beginning.
Amanda, did you want to add to that?
I think what Bradley's speech was amazing, and is so true. And the only thing I would add is that I hope when people watch the film, they also really take note of, you know, Nate, who also helped make the RV road trip possible, because he was there with Ady every single day. And how lucky were the two of them to be best friends and going on that journey, but also sharing a really intimate and, you know, challenging road trip, in which Ady needed a lot of care, and Nate was right there beside him. And I also hope that they take note of Mario, who you see also help Ady and Nate get to the Medicare for All testimony. And they were there the entire time, taking incredibly good care of him and enabling him to do the hugely important work that he's doing. So, you know, it takes a lot of really dedicated, incredible, empathetic caregivers to help people live their lives to the fullest extent that they can. You know, it's helped Ady stay home with Carl and Willow now, and they're able to be a family because of these incredible people, and they deserve to be supported. So I hope people really take note of that too while watching the film.
So I have time for just one more question. So I just want to ask Ady, you know, what do you hope people take away from this portrait of your struggle, your work, you?
I hope people come away from the movie understanding that I found great joy and meaning in the struggle for justice, even as ALS has paralyzed my body. Being part of the movement for health justice has given me purpose, a community, and the chance to nudge our society in the right direction. It's allowed me to transcend my dying body and find personal liberation. I don't think those things are just for me, that purpose, that opportunity to give back. Those are things available to everyone who strives to guarantee human dignity for all people. I hope that's what those who watch the movie take away from it. And I hope they get involved as a result. I don't think they'll regret it.
Well, thank you, Ady. And really thank all of you for this great discussion. I think this movie kind of powerfully shows that no matter how righteous, necessary an issue you have, when you're making a documentary about, when you put a person front and center, when you make it about people, that does everything. So Ady, thank you for all you've done to make the country better and in the face of so much adversity. And thank you, Nick, Amanda, and Bradley for getting Ady's story out there so wonderfully.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Robert. And thanks to the IDA and Bradley for believing in us for so long.
It was easy.
Right.